Everyone, in this video we're gonna learn about or have an introduction to the time value of money. Time value of money is concerned with equivalence relationships between cash flows. As we know, uh, uh, money, an amount of money has different value in different times. $10,000 today, for example, is not worth the same as $10,000 in a year. So time obviously affects money. So the whole concept of time value of money is that uh, differently dated cash flows have different values, and it kind of tries to create a relationship between these differently dated cash flows. So basically, time value of money is literally an interest rate. And interest rate is the symbol is R, and interest rate is defined as the rate of return that reflects the relationship between differently dated cash flows. So there is another concept called money value of time, which is not really related to this topic, but just I'm mentioning this to compare it to time value of money. Money value of time, we might cover this in our economics lesson. Value of time is simply wage, right? You exchange your time for money, and that's basically called wage. So this is just a different concept, but I just wanted to mention it. Now let's see this example. Let's say I'm gonna ask you to pay. I'm gonna ask you to pay $10,000 today, and I will say you pay me $10,000 today, and then later today you'll receive 9,500 later today. Do you think that will be a very interesting proposition to you? Would you pay me $10,000 today to receive $9,500 later today? That's not really an interesting proposition. You're going to be losing $500 just in a day, right? So that's not a very attractive proposition. So let's turn this around, and then let's say you're going to receive, I'm going to loan you, and you receive 9,500 today, but you'll pay me $10,000 a year from now. Would that be an interesting proposition to you? Probably, right? So the $500 difference is basically the required rate of compensation for me for letting you borrow my money today and waiting a year. We never know what happens in between today and a year from now. So this $500 is kind of a compensation for me for that uncertainty between now and a year from now, right? So basically, what happens is that when we divide 500 by 9,500, that will give us the interest rate, which is about 5.26%, right? This is my required rate of compensation for letting you borrow my money for a year. So this is basically the concept of time value of money and interest rates. Now, we can think about interest rate in three ways. We can think about interest rates, or R, in three ways. First, we can think about it as a required rate of return. Second, we can think about it as a discount rate. Third, we can think about it as an opportunity cost. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by required rate of return? For example, the $500 here is my required rate of return, right? Or this 5.26%, which amounts to $500 out of the 9,500, is my required rate of return, or my required rate of compensation for letting you borrow my money for a year, not knowing, whether you'll pay me, not knowing uh, uh, the inflation rate, and any risk that might happen between now and a year from now. And this 5.6% or $500 may incorporate these premiums, this inflation, default premium. We never know what happens between now and a year from now. So this $500 in my head, includes all these uncertainties, and that's my required rate of compensation. And you'll pay me $10,000 a year from now for borrowing $9,500 today. So that's my required rate of return. So we can think about interest rates as required rate of return. We can also think about it as a discount rate, you know. So what I'm thinking is, so a year from now, let's say, let's do a timeline here. This arrow is time, right? And we have 0 and 1. So t is equal to 0 is now, is the present day, this now, and 1 is the end of the first year, right? This gap is 1 year long, and this is today, and this is a year from now. So here I I let you borrow $9,500, and I say at the end of year one, I say you are gonna pay me $10,000. So what discount rate means is that, so if I wanted to receive $10,000 a year from now, by how much should I discount this $10,000 so that I can arrive at an amount for today that I am willing to let you borrow? So discounting this $10,000 by 5.26%, discounting it, because I have to discount it. This money is not going to be worth the same as, so if I let you borrow $10,000 today and receive $10,000 a year from now, those two $10,000 are not the same. So this $10,000 a year from now has to be discounted by certain interest rates to arrive at an amount that I will let you borrow today. So that's what discounting basically means. We have to discount a money so that we can arrive for an amount that we're willing to invest or let somebody borrow today. So discounting $10,000 by 5.26% will let us arrive at 9,500. So that's what means by a discount rate, or thinking about interest rate in terms of a discount rate. So what about an opportunity cost? An opportunity cost is a very interesting concept. So let's say I have $9,500 today. I can either invest it, which means I can invest it in any kind of instrument, securities, financial instruments. I can put it in a bank. I can put it in a savings account. I can let somebody borrow or lend it for someone at an interest rate, or I can just spend it uh, on a consumer good. I don't know. You can buy a TV, you can buy a car, anything. Spend it on a consumer good. That doesn't make me money. Okay, I have two options: money, right? I have these two options. So if I take this option, what what will happen to me, or what am I doing? If I just spend it instead of invest it or lend it to someone at an interest rate, I'm going to be foregoing the opportunity to earn interest on this amount. I'll just spend it, it's gone. Okay? So we so this 5.26%, okay, if I think about interest rate in terms of opportunity cost, this 5.26% or this $500 is the opportunity cost for me for not investing it and just wasting that money on a consumer good. So it's an opportunity cost. It's something it costs me. Okay, instead of opportunity cost basically means the cost that we incur by taking a certain action instead of another, right? So we can think about interest rate in terms of opportunity cost. So now, how do we calculate interest rate, or what items constitute an interest rate? So interest rate are the interest rate is the sum of real risk-free interest rate inflation premium default risk premium liquidity premium and finally maturity premium. So what does this mean? So what's the real risk-free interest rate? The real risk-free interest rate, as the name indicates, it's risk-free. It's just that single period interest rate for a completely risk-free security if no inflation were to be expected. So this is just a single period. It could be a year, a month, whatever the maturity period is, a single period interest rate for a completely risk-free security if no inflation was to be expected. And a security basically means, let me just write the definition here. It's real risk-free interest rate, right? Real risk-free interest rate is the single period interest rate for a completely risk-free security if no inflation were to be expected. Uh, Here, what does security mean? Security is just any security. Security means just any tradable financial asset. Okay, so any tradable financial asset. Example could be a stock, could be a bond, um, it could be anything, real estate, could be credit default swaps, anything that has value that can be traded in the financial markets is called a security. So the real risk-free interest rate is just that single period. That single period is the period, uh, the period. For example, if it's a year, if you're agreeing to, buy something, I mean, borrow something today and pay it a year later, that year long period is called a single period. So that single period interest rate, if for completely risk-free security, like in reality, there's always some risk, but this is just one component of the interest rate, and it kind of represents that risk-free component of the interest rate, right? Now, what about the inflation premium, IP? Now, inflation premium is that component of the interest rate that compensates investors for expected inflation. Okay, we don't know what the expected inflation will be, so it's an expected inflation. It's something that we calculate based on whatever information we have now. It's so this inflation premium compensates investors for expected inflation, and it reflects the average inflation expected over the maturity of the debt. The debt. For example, the debt in our example was that $9,500 that you borrow, and that $500 required rate of return that I calculated may include an inflation premium in it. Okay. Now, what about default risk premium? Now, default risk premium, this simply compensates investors for the possibility that a borrower, you know, they so you may borrow you may have debt, right? You may borrow something, money, anything, and you might not be able to pay. There's that uncertainty, right? So this default risk premium compensates investors, so people who lend, or who lend their funds, whatever funds they have. It compensates them for the possibility that you, the borrower, will fail to make, the promised payment at the contracted time. You know, you may promise to pay a year from now, 2 years from now, that contracted time, and in the contracted amount. So this default risk premium is a premium that's included in the calculation of the interest rates that compensates this investor for the possibility that you might not be able to pay the money that you borrowed, right? What's the other one? Liquidity premium, right? What's liquidity? Liquidity is a concept that describes the ease with which a certain financial asset can be converted into cash quickly, right? Cash is by itself, cash is cash. So cash is going to be like the most liquid asset, right? There are certain assets like real estate, and other assets that are very difficult to convert into cash very quickly. So they're referred to as illiquid assets. So liquidity premium, basically what it does is it compensates investors for the risk. It compensates investors for the risk of loss relative to an investment's fair value if the investment needs to be converted to cash quickly. So whatever asset that they lend someone, if it's very difficult to convert this asset to cash very quickly, they will include this premium into the calculation of the interest rate so that they're compensated in case there comes a time that this asset needs to be converted to cash very quickly. So that's what's called liquidity premium, right? So the last premium that's used, or that's used in the calculation of the interest rate, is the maturity premium. And the maturity premium simply compensates investors for increased sensitivity of the market value of debt to a change in market interest rates as maturity is extended. So sometimes there's debt, and that debt will be paid at the end of a period, and that end period is called the maturity, right? Sometimes there are conditions or situations where that maturity period might need to be extended, right? But some investors may want that their money on the initial maturity period rather than the extended one. So if there's this risk, if there's a maturity risk, a maturity period risk, this maturity premium is included in the calculation of the interest rate so that it compensates the investor. So these are basically the different types of premium that are included in the calculation of the interest rate. Now let's just think about some concept here. So there is another term for the sum of the first two. So these first two, the real risk-free interest rate plus inflation premium, the real risk-free interest rate plus inflation premium they are called the nominal risk-free interest rate. So the sum of the real risk-free interest rate and the inflation premium is called the nominal risk-free interest rate. Now, think about these 90-day US Treasury bills, these debt instruments. There are 90-day Treasury bills, or let's call them, they're issued by the US government, so they're called the 90-day US Treasury bills, or simply they're called these T-bills. So you buy these from the US government, right? And they usually mature, they have a short-term maturity date, they mature in 90 days. So the interest rate that the US government calculates on these treasury bills and pays you at the end of the 90-day period, that interest rate is the nominal interest rate. It only includes the inflation premium. It doesn't include the other premiums because the US government, so in the calculation of this nominal risk-free interest rate, why don't we include the default risk premium? Because the US government will never default. The US government will always pay you, right? What about the maturity? Why only inflation premium? Why not the maturity premium. It's not included in this calculation of the nominal risk-free interest because the US government will pay you back at the end of the 90 days. There is no risk of extension of the maturity period. So if you think about the 90-day US Treasury bills, if you buy these Treasury bills from the US government at the end of the 90 period, you will be paid the nominal risk-free interest rate on that investment. Uh, so interest rate basically is the sum of all these uh, premiums and the real risk-free interest rate, and depending on the type of death, uh, different different components of the interest rate are used to calculate the actual interest rate. With this, in the next video, we will calculate the future value of a single sum. That means you invest a particular amount of money today, and given a discount rate or given an interest rate, we will see how much that present investment will be worth at the end of a period. Uh, and we'll also learn about what compounding means in that context. Thank you for listening.